I would like to call to order this meeting of the Stormwater Management Board on February 10th, 2021. And the first item is approval of the minutes for January 13th.
We had one small comment for fixing a small spelling error. I had Donna fix that, so I'd like to put that as a condition of approval for the minutes, please.
I move approval of the January 13th, 2021 minutes with the small correction.
I'll second.
Right, I'll ask for public comment. And if we could have a roll call vote, please. Kelsey?
That me? All right. Enright Randolph,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
and Thomas.
Yes.
Madam President, I would just like to make one brief comment to Kelsey is if you just rotate that order moving forward would be helpful. It's probably pretty easy since there's only 4 of us, but.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that is a good idea to do that. Thank you, Tron. All right, old business. It doesn't look like we have any old business at all. So let's move on to new business and the stormwater expenditure report.
All right, so here's the expenditure report from January. I'm still getting familiar with the program, so bear with me this time. I'm hoping in future meetings I'll have some more information for you. So this was all the expenditures from January. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will just go through the numbers for you. So under the accounts in the tens, account total is $74,859.26. Year-to-date used is going to be 10.41%. In the 20s, $3,941.01. Year-to-date used 3.01%. In the 30s, total is $116,395.21. Year-to-date total is 14.09%. Nothing in the 40s. January total, $195,195.48, 11.65% year-to-date used. Does anyone want more clarification or information on any of the items in the expenditure report?
I would just open it up to public if they have a question.
I have one question.
Well, hey, oh, that's why I'm saying move to the public. So I have no comments. Sorry.
I was waiting to see if anyone on the board had a comment. Now we're ready for public comment. Thank you.
I have one comment. One question. What is garage retainage? Item 30061.
I'm going to defer to Terry or Lisa on that one. Do you have any input on that item?
This is my, I believe it's maybe the retainage that we paid back when we did the highway garage detention.
And that was completed last year?
Yes.
That's correct. I was holding it on until I got some vegetation put down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move to a roll call vote. Ms. Sitonia?
Thomas?
What are we approving? Because we usually just get a report.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right.
I just didn't, I'm sorry if I missed something.
No, I'm just about which meeting I'm in right now.
I'm good.
Call it.
all good. Belts and suspenders. We could still do a roll call vote.
I think we have once or twice, so that might lead to a bit of confusion, but we typically don't.
Okay, sorry about that. Then our next item is the Lake Monroe Water Fund, a request for $1,000 donation.
I move to approve or open it for discussion. I'm still not certain how we move these forward to discuss them and then approve it. So
And I,
I'd be happy to give some background on this
I
project.
second it.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, Ms. Tonia, if you have anything, or I know Ms. Martin is with us and may have some information for us.
Yeah. I'll introduce it really quick, and then Jane, if you wanted to add anything, you're welcome. I'm going to say you're welcome to do that. So the Lake Monroe Water Fund, they are a small group that has formed with the hopes of getting a sustainable funding source to help with the management of Lake Monroe, since it's it's owned by one entity. It's managed by several others. There are different I guess, government organizations managing the lands that surround it, so its whole watershed. So finding a single source to help protect it, since it is a great resource for recreation for all the counties surrounding it. It's a drinking water source for a good chunk of Monroe County and others. So if this sounds like this is all startup costs for the group to get going, with the hopes that one day they can find more sustainable sources of funding through grants and other means. So I hope I did it justice, Jane.
Kelsey, that was very well done. I appreciate it. And I'm aware of the heavy lift here. Meeting you and introducing this project for the first time, as well as with my handout. And particularly since Julie indicated that she was wondering if this Roundup program was to put pesticides into the watershed. And that is the opposite of what we're trying to do. Friends of Lake Monroe, Nature Conservancy, Conservation Law Center, City of Bloomington Utilities, and myself, just a retired financial person who cares a lot about the environment, have been meeting for well over 3 years. We've interviewed all the stakeholders. We've put a dashboard together for what studies are available and how dated they are and where the gaps are. We've mapped out the jurisdictions from federal, Army Corps of Engineers, state of Indiana, and our local jurisdictions. And then we convened a board a little over a year ago. We're calling it a task force with all the primary stakeholders from agriculture, Brown County, the business community, the environmental community, Friends of Lake Monroe, Nature Conservancy, all of the relative constituencies, city and county, of course, to put together a board that will evaluate proposals and find their own proposals to connect an ongoing source of funding for the various studies that have been done over decades that gather dust and become outdated. And so we're trying to, with the prospect of the 319, the first 319 grant finishing at the end of this year, it will come up with a watershed management program, but it will still need funding. And there is also other projects and other grants that are available to us. So we're beginning a little bit of fundraising to fund our startup costs. We filed as a 501c3. We've received our designation. We have an EIN number, and all of those costs have been funded by Bill Weeks. I've funded the opening of a bank account and the fundraising. My intern is out for a couple of weeks, so you can see how poorly I'm doing on formatting this proposal. Believe me, there's a lot of thought and expertise that goes behind this proposal. The costs involve not just the legal and beginning costs of opening bank accounts, et cetera, setting up ACH, et cetera, but it's also, we want the initial funding source, asking folks, both institutions and individuals, to, oh, I was just hearing,
You did, Michelle or Dave, could you mute your mic?
Sorry, I didn't know if someone was wanting me to stop talking. I'm almost finished. I just simply wanted to say that we want this roundup program, rounding up the bills, or making a one-time or a recurring donation, and the expenses of partnering with the big institutions in town to get them to co-promote the roundup for the water bill. And we're hoping that if we can have a successful campaign, that campaign costs $4,200. It's the least expensive we can do to really get the ball rolling. And then we may be able to hire an executive director by late fall of this year, who can then explore other funding opportunities, environmental foundations, and federal and state granting authorities. So I think I will leave it there and entertain your questions, and thank you for considering this.
Thank you. I'll have to admit that being involved in agriculture, when I hear Roundup program, I'm thinking of pesticides also.
I know.
Maybe the name, I don't know. Are there any questions from the board or comments? Julie?
Yeah, I actually thought that that was going to be your first work, was to eliminate the use of herbicides in the glyphosates. I'm concerned because you're counting on a lot of things happening, like that people will voluntarily round up the cost of the price of their water bill, especially when there's an increase pending from the city of Bloomington, which will impact everybody in this area through their water suppliers. And what happens if you don't get the money? And the second thing is, how are decisions going to be made about what should be funded? Would this funding source actually be used to complete a project that, for example, the stormwater studies that's being done in the community, they find that this would be a good project? Is this intended to actually fund a project? And that will take a lot of money in addition to hiring an executive director, my gosh. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out how decisions are made about finances, because it's a small group that's running this.
It's a small group, Julie, but it is intended to be a very public group, and it is intended to represent the most prominent stakeholders with a very balanced view. And our charter is really to provide funding. We may initiate proposals, but initially we expect proposals to come to us from the board and from resources in agriculture or forestry. Mike Chavez, who's on our board, continues to send us information about grants that are $400,000 to $600,000 for forestry management. And we don't have a grant writer right now. We don't have an entity that can go after those grants. So as to a more direct question that you asked, how will decisions be made? This will be a representative board, legally incorporated under the 501c3 provisions, a not-for-profit. People rounding up will get tax credits. People making contributions, we will send a tax statement at year end. So part of it will be on us as a board and our partners to initiate a public education and marketing campaign with a logo and a tagline to encourage, to make the case for how important this is for the long-term sustainability. The board right now in its articles and bylaws requires a majority vote. So I'm assuming that Friends of Lake Monroe will be a very large beneficiary because they're good at implementing grants and writing grants. So we look to partner with the existing organizations in town. And we also went back and forth on whether we should move toward mandatory provisions for long-term sustainability of the lake or whether to keep it on a voluntary basis. And we came to the determination that even climate deniers want clean water and clean air and a safe environment and a robust economy that can grow because we have adequate clean water resources. So we determined that there's about 80%, that's just a guess, overlap between the interests of everybody in the watershed and that we could get a lot done before water becomes a crisis with common ground. So I hope I've answered your question. I would also just say one more thing. I've spent 40 years as a venture capitalist starting companies, and it is always opaque to see what's going to happen in the future. Will the Roundup campaign be successful? But I'm fairly skilled at making course corrections when things don't work. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can take a creative approach to initiating this movement before we have a crisis with our sole water supply.
Yeah, I think the issue, I'm just trying to ferret out information for the public because we are responsible to the public for any funds that we spend. And I would encourage you to do the same. I think having a group of people who look like they represent a bunch of people in the community, but don't, I think those folks need to have public meetings with public input because people will not trust donating pennies, dollars to something where they don't have any input, where they can't say, I think this is a horrible idea for a project, or I think this is a great idea for a project. It's just, and the mission is very nebulous, which is why I asked the other question, because to develop a permanent structure that enables community investment to encourage voluntary implementation of mutually beneficial science-based watershed protection practices needs to be explained. Does that mean the money to enable community investment, does that mean the money is coming from this program? Or does that mean and that's what you explained, it could be a match to a grant, for example. So those are the key issues I have. I am concerned, and I can honestly say that I would be happy to support something like this, but I don't think I would be happy to support this every year, right? Startup is different than every year. If it's not functioning, it just can't. So that's my take on it.
Our intention is not to come back to you for more funds or to any of our initial funding sources. It is a lift toward self-sustaining projects. And I agree with you on the public education. We we don't have a tagline or printed materials or digital materials. We don't have a logo, so we're waiting for that to happen. We're working bi-weekly with our branding source, and we will be beginning the public education program as well as partnering with the corporations in town, the chamber, the various factions at IU. But you're quite right. We have a big case to make in public education. I would also say that we're not going to be collecting money on our own until we're better established, 6 to 12 months. So right now, we're just working with the City of Bloomington Utilities to get an insert into their bill and a box on the bill that people can check about making a donation, rounding up, a one-time donation or recurring. So I don't disagree with you about the need for a public education campaign, but I also say CBU will give it some credibility.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Ms.
Jenny,
Martin?
please go ahead. I noticed that your hand was up. I have one after.
I have several. Has City of Bloomington Utilities firmly signed on to do this program?
Yes, they've passed a resolution at their board subject to administrative detail and us getting a 501c3. That was approved early January at their board meeting. And Vic Kelson is very keen on doing this. And he has a long list of projects he wants us to consider, as may you.
Yeah, I actually have several questions. So one of them was, what types of research might you be conducting?
Well, we may, I told you we'd done a dashboard of all the studies that have been done and how dated they are and where the gaps are. So once we get funding, we will be looking to IU, SPIA, perhaps Friends of Lake Monroe, other organizations that could fill in those gaps in research. But I think initially in the first year or two, my experience with startups is that you have to show early success. And there's some low-hanging fruit. And so we're working on identifying a project with Soil and Water in Brown County to just cast a broader net, so this doesn't just look like it's a Monroe County operation, but it really does represent all the counties that are affecting in the watershed, Brown County being over half of the watershed. And small things like agricultural runoff is from fertilizer is, a problem for the watershed. So Joe Miller, who's on our board from Roseacre Farm, said, if you could just fund someone to do a study at $100 a pop, for example, available to our farmers so that they will get a survey of what is required for their land versus just pouring on the chemicals every year as they do, we could substantially reduce the agricultural runoff. So there's a very broad range of, there's agricultural land that with climate change is permanently underwater now. So we'd like to be able to remove that agricultural land from the watershed, from the agricultural designation, and make it conservation. So there's some very low-hanging fruit projects that I think can instill some good momentum.
I thought there were a lot of the farmers these days were sort of zeroed down onto a by acre kind of thing in terms of what they were adding, whether it's herbicides or fertilizer or anything, that they're using satellite imagery and other things, that they really are down at that kind of micro level already.
You're correct that they are, but it's not pervasive. Joe Miller says in Jackson County, where he lives and works and interfaces all the time with the ag community, that less than half of the farmers are actually getting an analysis of their lands. So, I mean, that's Jackson County. I think
Yeah.
some of the bigger farms, you're most correct that they use GPS for planting and contours and certainly for nutrients.
So in addition to what you've just described with this project, with the sort of the individual farmers almost, what kind of policies would you see coming out of the research that would impact Lake Monroe and all the surrounding counties?
Well, you know, I'm not sure how this committee is going to evolve. So I think our plan is to try to get a sustainable source from the Roundup, leading us to grants, probably in the forestry and ag area, and then be able to hire a full-time executive director. And then we will probably break up into a funding committee, subcommittee, and a nominating committee, so that we can make sure that all of our various constituencies are represented. And that's probably 3 years into the future, Penny. So I don't think I can look around the corner right now to see how this will evolve, but I think it will roll out in a similar way to most nonprofits, where there's great transparency, there's tax credits that we can give to for-profit organizations to incentivize. We're trying to make a case on our website and in our printed material that we're trying to be preventative before we have a crisis. Lake Monroe was built in 1964. It celebrated a year and a half ago its first 50 years. It was built to be a 100-year lake. It's a mud puddle. There's no stream input into Lake Monroe. It recycles the same water through evaporation and then rainfall. And building around it fills up the capacity of the lake. So there's a lot of work to be done before we move from volunteer to policy requirements. But that is probably in the future. I think water is the single biggest issue of the 21st century. It's directly related to climate change, so it's a corollary of climate change. And so we just need to be in the forefront, as Bloomington and Monroe County usually are. And this would be the first water fund in the state of Indiana. So we're pioneering again. And but we're working with the Nature Conservancy, who has helped co-create over 200 water funds around the world. So we have a very good resource with TNC.
Very last question, a real techie thing. There's nobody from the Army Corps of Engineers involved in this, and do we need that kind of involvement? Or I know that they're really hands-off with a lot of things, but what kind of cooperation?
That was my concern as well. And so that's why we brought the Conservation Law Center in, and they have done an extensive review of all the overlapping constituencies. The Army Corps of Engineers is primarily focused not on water, but on flood control. And so that's their purview, and they sort of stay out of it. But we do have a map, and we will be putting that graphic on our website so that our website will include a lot of information for the various jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes, you covered some of them. That was great. I had the concern with the Army Corps and their involvement, and I think you're right. I think there's a number of overlapping processes that IDEM, EPA, and the Army Corps all interjoin or intermingle together. I sat on a panel discussion with everyone there once, and I'll see if I can pull the presentation up. It really kind of gives you a nice flow chart of how all of these overlap and just how complicated that process can be. So you addressed that. A couple of my other questions were addressed. I want to start with echoing, I think, Commissioner Thomas's point that I think approval of how these projects move forward is one of the most critical things. But also, I think this kind of just goes hand in hand with some of our other initiatives that we have taken on here. And one of them is the Friends of Lake Monroe Watershed Study. I think there's a huge component where as we reveal concerns that need to be addressed, we don't necessarily have a funding mechanism to address those. And we're working in 5 different counties. So that's going to be quite difficult in itself. I almost think we should do something like this more routinely if it's proven effective. If it's proven effective, I think we should do this more routinely, because I do not think that we, over the last since I've served since 2016, have been able to pivot in this direction, because we have so much other demand with stormwater, and I think stormwater is doing a fantastic job. So moving in directions to get assistance like this, I think, is the most critical thing we can do as a board, so we can address some more of these larger issues, especially our drinking water supply. Ag is very tough to regulate. Send me some regulations of ag, and I would love to read it, because the only thing I ever read is how they're exempt from almost any oversight. So that's tough. And I think the only way we can actually address this is education and volunteer work, because you can't regulate it. So I think something like this is super valuable if it works. So sorry I'm not doubting the effort or the ability of this working, but that's pretty critical too, because we want these dollars to be spent well, and as good stewards of taxpayers' money and ratepayers' money, we want to make sure that it's executed as it's intended. So yeah, I think Ms. Githens had a lot of the same questions I had, and I'm fully in support of this, and I think it just really goes hand in hand with our efforts with developing a watershed study, because if we only make a mess and bring up all the concerns but no way to clean it up, that's not in our best interest. And another thing that you spoke to is what I really like is how a lot of this comprehensive work has been done in the past, and you can just find so much information, like 300-400 reports, but then it's all static, it's all paper, and then it just gets put in a shelf. And next thing you know, the person that wrote it has to come to these meetings and be like, I did a study on this, here it is. And it's like, no one knows about it. So I think this could be a helpful way. You mentioned dashboard. I'm assuming that's a GIS dashboard. So not too sure, but it's becoming more of a common term. So to bring that information to the forefront where it's easier to obtain, easier to comb through, easier to digest, I think is just something that could be very beneficial to us as well. So those are my thoughts. As you can see, I'm very supportive of this because I do not think that without assistance like this, that we could really kind of get a lot of this done. And thank you for bringing this to the board. And I know I threw one or two questions in.
No, that's wonderful. I would also say to your point about the studies, Tron, is the last comprehensive study was done by SPIA in 1997. That's 23 years ago. The lake has changed a lot. So the prospect is connecting a coincident funding source with a new study, because the lake has changed a lot and it's going to continue to change. So we can't get real action out of these research studies that are critical, most essential, unless we connect them to a funding source. So that's the idea. And that's the idea in a little different iterations for all the water funds around the country and around the world, essentially connecting a funding source so that action can take place on problems either before they become critical or when they do become critical.
Thank you. I would like to point out that in actual fact, certified organic agriculture is very, very highly regulated, extremely much so. And non-organic agriculture is the source of many, many of the problems with the lake. So clearly, encouraging and supporting our organic agriculture will do more than almost anything to help the lake out. But that's kind of an aside. What I kind of like to hear about is that while Monroe County is the county that's most dependent on Lake Monroe for water, the majority of the watershed lies in other counties, and they don't have the same dependence on the water and have rather a different view often of conservation and concern about these kinds of things. And how will you make that work? And then also what you've mentioned so far, well, talking about the checkbox on the utility bills and all of that, if that's only Bloomington Utilities, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot more that it would be helpful to reach.
Yes, CBU has, and I'll get back to your county question in a moment, but CBU has 27,000 hookups representing 147,000 customers. They also have 11 wholesale customers, and I'm getting a list from Vic, but that includes the city of Nashville that gets their water from the town of Nashville. So it includes the city of Ellettsville. There's 11 wholesale customers, and we're going to be working with them because they represent another roughly 20 to 25,000 hookups. And so we're getting that list to initiate those programs so that we can cast our net more widely. I can also tell you that our representative from Brown County, Judy Stewart, who's a retired judge there, and the Community Foundation are very concerned about their water. There are so many failed septic systems in Brown County that they know they have a water contamination problem. They also are very unhappy with their current water vendor. So at some point in the future, I'm expecting that Brown County will have higher hookups to the city of Bloomington and to Lake Monroe. But you raise another point that's most important about the various counties. Jackson County is an agricultural county. We don't sell them any water, therefore we don't have any leverage. Why should they care about the lake? So the point is a public education program that says groundwater from Jackson County is affected by Lake Monroe. Our watershed for 5 surrounding counties is something that you should care about. But these voluntary programs that can help the farmers, sort of a win-win type strategy in Jackson County, can mitigate the agricultural runoff into the lake, causing algae blooms and all kinds of imbalance in the water, can also help the farmers by saving them money on fertilizers or removing agriculture land by buying it back and putting it into a conservation zone. Brown County is critically important, and I was pleased to find that there is such support for this project in Brown County. So Brown County represents half of the watershed. As you point out, it's not all in Monroe County, and most of that is forested land, and much of that is private land. So finding a sizable forestry grant, and again, Mike Chavez keeps sending us links for a new $400,000 or $600,000 forestry management program that will, that will help the water. So I'm assuming that we can do a lot once we begin to plug into the forestry management grants that can help both private landowners and public landowners. I hope that begins to answer your question, but it's a much bigger subject and we don't have a lot of leverage. So public education, getting back to what Julie said, is going to be critical. A speakers bureau, public meetings, etc.
Yeah, I believe that many of those 11 wholesale purchasers of water are actually providing water mostly to the outlying parts of Monroe County that CBU doesn't run to. So an awful lot of that is still being consumed in Monroe County. Certainly Brown County is of extreme importance, but so is Jackson County, and that's right. A tougher nut. Commissioner Thomas, I believe you had your hand up.
Awesome, thanks. I did have a couple follow-up questions. So do you, yes or no, do you currently have a 501c3 for this?
We do.
Okay, great. The second one is I'm concerned because there's this discussion of, we need to fix things, and yes, we do. I don't think anybody here would disagree. My concern is that there are a lot of groups doing a lot of things. We have our Soil and Water Conservation District that's working on specific ag-related things, and we have Friends of Lake Monroe who are absent from your board, who were doing our stormwater study.
They're on our board.
Well, it's vacant.
No, well, because Kevin Dogan was on the board until December, and so now Jim Kraus will be going on. We're voting him on at the end of this month.
Okay. So there's Friends of Lake Monroe. We're doing the watershed study. I'm part of that steering committee. Friends of Lake Monroe has a whole bunch of needs now because they want to continue with the director person in that role to actually oversee and look over what projects are going on and help fundraise for that. Now I've just mentioned 3 organizations, including your own. How are we going to get you all to work together? Because that seems to me to be the biggest thing. Like, I do not want to see us throwing money here, throwing money there, throwing money there. And then it turns out that the 3 of you all are on the same project, but doing very different things that are wasting energy and time. So how do we, is there a commitment from your board that you will work with these other organizations, that you will work together? Is there some mechanism to bring you all together at least annually to sit down and talk about what's going on in Lake Monroe?
Well, in the initial period, Julie, we spent 3 years interviewing soil and water conservation. We invited them to our meetings. We invited the ag community. We invited forestry. We invited Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources. So we've been talking to these people all along. We've tried to represent most of the constituencies for water and for the economy and for the environment on our water fund committee board. And I would suspect that there will be lots of proposals from Friends of Lake Monroe, from Brown County, from Soil and Water Conservation that will come to us just because we have money. And the other organizations may not have money or may need a match for whatever they're doing. So, I think if we look at a Venn diagram of the various environmental and water focused organizations, not for profit organizations, there's quite an overlap between us. And I think we view ourselves as complementary to most of those organizations, but there is a case to be made for us being in competition with them. And it is not our intention to be in competition. For example, Friends of Lake Monroe has a particular environmental focus, and but forestry is a huge part of Lake Monroe and the watershed. So we just need to find a way to project transparency and compatibility with these organizations. There's a ton of not-for-profits and they all overlap. There's a ton of individual schools at IU and they sometimes overlap. And so I think the point of view that we are going to be focused on is how we can complement and enhance and be a catalyst to those other organizations. But I do agree with you that there is a potential series of competing interests that we're going to have to manage. And I think some of that will be flushed out in our public meetings, in our speakers bureau, and in our public education programs. But it's a challenge, and you're right to point it out.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, is there any?
I have one question. Do we have the authority to make this kind of grants? Under the stormwater kind of
So,
ordinance?
yeah, I'm concerned because it's called a donation and that's not, we don't donate money. So I think what it is a request for an appropriation from our existing fund for, I'm assuming, education. But that would need to be clarified. Does that answer your question, Penny?
Dave's here, but he's not right there, so
Yeah,
we
Yeah.
could try to
yeah,
get him
Dave's
to.
wall.
Would you like me to drop off?
Oh, I don't think that's necessary.
We still have to take public comment, but we have to make sure we have the right motion.
Yeah, which I don't think we do right now. I
Yeah.
think we only have a motion to discuss.
Yeah.
So if I could hear a motion to approve.
Well, do we have to structure? I can call Dave real quick on his direct line and see if I are we asking for legal counsel advice right here to move? Oh, there.
Here he is. He's on.
You're on
Hey,
mute,
you're
Dave.
muted. You're
Julie
muted.
had a question for you.
There you go. Hey, thanks. We have this listed on the agenda as a donation and we don't make donations. So I guess what I'm looking for is, and part of this has to come from stormwater from our MS4 operator, is what is the actual motion? And I'm assuming this is from an appropriated fund, an already appropriated fund. So which fund? And we don't do donations, correct, Mr. Schilling?
I believe donations have been done in the past, but I'll have to look at that. And I simply don't know what fund this would come from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's going to come from the stormwater budget, there probably isn't a line in there at this point that would support a donation. So you'd probably have to go in front of the council, I think, to get that squared away. But
do my colleagues on this board agree that this seems to be an educational expense? Or is that stretching it too far? Or does MS4 Stormwater Department have any suggestions for a place in the budget where this money would come out of that it fits?
That's the first thing that came to my mind, Julie, was the education. I'm looking at there.
There's certainly a strong education component of it.
I will say we also had a line for the water gauging station that Friends of Lake Monroe installed last year. That was a one-time deal last year. I think it does best fit into education at this point. My concern with the money, like I would rather put it towards implementation and actually matching grants with it first. That's just my point of view. But I think for this project specifically, there is a lot of outreach involved, so.
Okay.
So, and then Jane just said that they can designate the grant solely for public education.
Except it's the startup for branding campaign. So that's,
Yeah.
so you are educating the public about the issues of Lake Monroe. I get that. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we approve $1,000 from the education fund for startup expenses for the Lake Monroe Water Fund.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it, but I thought we still had a motion on the table.
No, he only opened it up for discussion.
It's a motion for discussion.
Okay,
There's
I'll second.
no discuss. There's no action on it.
Okay.
All right. Is there any further discussion from the board? Being none, is there any public comment? I'm not seeing any. All right. Have a roll call vote? Or actually, let me bring it back to the board first to make sure there's nothing else anyone wants to ask or comment on.
Would it be possible to have some written description of where this money would be applied to so that we can actually say this is going for an educational purpose that falls within our permit requirements?
Do we need it in written form, or would them stating it out loud be? Okay, I see that. I see your facial reaction. So I'd like to offer a friendly amendment that we condition this approval to having a written commitment that this grant / donation will solely be for public education.
I need a second on that.
I'm fine with that.
All right.
I'm not sure if that answers Dave's question. I think he wants more of a description of how the money is going to be used more than a commitment, but maybe we could get both.
I'm wondering if we're really quite ready to take a vote on this yet, if we shouldn't
Yeah.
formalize the request a
Mhm.
little more.
Mm-hmm.
So that it comes in more like with a
Cover sheet. Package.
yeah.
Yeah.
Line
What?
item, all of that, yeah.
Well, they've got some line items on there. That's not the issue. It's more that it's more formalized, I guess is. We're just used to seeing things in a different format.
I just know that in the past, some of our educational initiatives where we've involved other parties have been described in written agreements.
Yeah.
And I just think we should be consistent in that.
Hey, Dave, would it be doable of maybe working with that organization on a example MOU like we do with soil and water?
That's what I was thinking, something along those lines.
Because we could actually send that to Jane and the format, it's very simple, but then it is in detail of what the agreement and what the funds are to be used for.
And then we wouldn't actually vote on that until next month when we get the.
All right, so I'm gonna withdraw my motion, and I will move that we continue this to our March meeting.
And just while we still have a discussion, I was curious, does that seem fine with you moving it forward? There's no need for us to entertain it today, right? And that's to Jane. Just want to get your input.
Yes, we can manage. We've collected enough money that we can pay our branding resource. So I realize this is a lot coming at you that's all brand new, and you may end up with other questions. I'm very happy to rework this into a designation solely for public education, and I'll describe how we would do that and put it in whatever format. I think that will come from you, Lisa. Is that correct?
Yeah, it can come. Yeah, you'll get it from either myself or Kelsey. It's just basically a very simple MOU that we've worked through the last few years with soil and water, but we'd be happy to get that to you.
Great. Thank you.
Great. I will second the motion to continue.
All right, then if there's no further discussion, may we please have a roll call vote?
Thomas,
Did you call me?
Thomas,
Yes.
Couldn't hear you. Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Githens,
Yes.
and Wright Randolph.
Yes.
Right, motion carries. This item is continued to the March meeting when we'll receive a more formalized request. And I believe that brings us to the end of this meeting.
We have one more item.
I'm
We
sorry,
actually,
I don't have everything that's gone on today. I didn't manage to print off my, oh yes, I'm sorry. The next item of business is the draft item, construction, stormwater, and MS4 general permits.
yeah, so this is actually a fairly big item that I'm looking forward to present to you. I just have a question on timing. I know everyone has another meeting following this, so how much time do we have?
I still have about 45 minutes.
Okay.
I will note that we also need to talk about the stormwater fee as
Okay.
well.
Oh, yes, yes, that was something that
Thanks.
got put off till today.
Okay.
Yeah, I can answer those questions we talked about earlier quickly, if you want me to do that now.
Yes.
I did have a chance to talk with Susie Johnson, and she said it would not be a problem to get a rate on this year. She had already received the rate files from Stormwater, and so she didn't think that any more were coming. She wasn't aware of the change, so that's why she said that to Jessica, that she didn't think she could get it on this year, but she told me she can. And I said, well, the current schedule, if things go well, would be March 10th. Is that too late? And she said, no. So we can get, if the stormwater fee increase is approved, we should be able to get it on the tax bill for this year. With respect to bonding, the statute does allow you to issue revenue bonds, and it does allow those to pledge your stormwater fee to the payment of bonds. So that's the information I have right now on bonding. I haven't talked to bond counsel or a financial advisor about how that might best be done. And if you want me to call a bond counsel, I'd be happy to. And I would just, need to have you guys tell me which bond counsel you'd want me to call. And that's it.
All right, thank you.
That's helpful information. Thank you.
Yes, it is. Okay, now I think we can move on to the draft item, construction, stormwater, and MS4 general permits.
Okay, so I prepared a presentation and Connie has as well. We have new state regulations that are very close to being implemented. First one is the state regulations for the MS4 program, and then the state regulations for the construction stormwater permits. I will just give a general overview of all of this for you. I'm sure this is not the last time we will talk about this. About the MS4 program as a whole and that general permit that is currently, it's past public notice at this point. So assuming early this year it will be implemented. And then Connie has a presentation prepared for the construction general permit and those changes. If we don't have time today, then I definitely want to include this on next month's agenda as well, so we can continue to update you all on these permits. So you may be familiar with the terms Rule 5, Rule 13, the Indiana Administrative Code. Article 15 includes all of the NPDES regulations, so that is the state stormwater regulations. It's all from the Clean Water Act, and IDEM has the authority to implement it in the state of Indiana. So Rule 5, or 327 IAC 15-5, those are your construction stormwater permits. 15-13, or Rule 13, is all of the MS4 regulations. So these are the regulations that created the MS4 program. It required us to create the ordinances that regulate stormwater in our county, creating the fee and all of that. The EPA is requiring the state to redo these rule-based permits. The reason being they found some conflict of interest in the rulemaking process in the state. So they're taking it out of the rule-based Indiana Administrative Code and making them administratively issued permits. This is on track with what the rest of the country is doing. We're one of the last states with rule-based permits. So this will bring all of the state regulations up to par with the rest of the country, I guess, what EPA is wanting to see from the state. And it's been a long time coming because the state hasn't updated these regulations since they were first implemented in 2003. So they are very outdated and vague. So they are giving us more guidance. More guidance also means we're going to be held accountable to do more. So for those who, I'm not sure if we have anyone here who wants a brief overview of the MS4, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System defines that acronym MS4. It's all of our county-owned conveyances that capture stormwater, conveys it and or treats it before discharging it into local waterways, namely our waters of the state, our major streams, lakes, and other surface water bodies or groundwater. The whole MS4 program really revolves around what you've probably heard about, the 6 minimum control measures. So MCM is the acronym you'll hear there, lots of acronyms. I'll try my best to define everything. Please stop me if you want me to discuss anything in more detail. But MCMs 1 and 2 are often lumped together, and you'll see that with this new permit, they've actually combined them to just streamline everything so there's no redundancy. So public education and outreach and public involvement, that is everything we are required to do as far as adult education, educating our local developers, contractors, lawn care companies, homeowners, and any of that. Oh, sorry. Illicit discharge detection and elimination, MCM3. Any illegal dumping that may be reported, we're required to have SOPs, standard operating procedures, to respond to those incidents and have an ordinance to enforce those, so we can make sure that we can either disconnect the illegal connection or find someone for negligence and violating our local ordinance. Forest construction, stormwater runoff, so our local permits for anything disturbing 1 acre or more. Post-construction is all of the requirements for treating stormwater and controlling the discharges off-site. So the drainage reports that you're used to hearing Terry discuss and seeing the detention ponds on sites, those are all required by the MS4 permit. The last one, municipal operations, is what we're doing to maintain our storm sewer system, and anything that the county does that could potentially pollute our waterways. How are we doing our best to minimize our impacts on our local water resources? Anything from street sweeping, salting, things like that. So a lot of the requirements that you'll see in the current regulations are kind of vague. They say that the MS4 is required to develop their own measurable goals for each of these MCMs. And that's really kind of for a lot of the extent of the guidance that we're getting. And then there really wasn't a hard and fast requirement to update our implementation plan for the MS4 as well. The new general permit is going to make things a little bit more regimented. So we're required to do annual reviews now. Normally we would just have every 5 year is the duration of each permit. So every 5 years you would resubmit the notice of intent. If you don't update your stormwater quality management plan, it'll probably come up in your audit, but there really before wasn't a whole detailed system on how to do that. So you'll find a lot more, the word must, it comes up a lot, I guess, for this new general permit. So it's actually requiring us to implement all of these different provisions. Okay. I won't go through everything in detail. I didn't send you each permit. They're about 45 pages long each, so I spared you from doing that, but I can go into more detail on any of these items this meeting or next meeting if you want to hear more. So MCM 1 and 2, combining those, like I said, education and outreach. So Rule 13 didn't provide hardly any guidance on this. And it was really just up to the MS4 to implement their stormwater quality management plan. So you'll basically, it was saying that you have to basically try your best to reach your constituents, but there weren't really any repercussions if that wasn't happening, as long as you were demonstrating you were trying your best. The new permit, however, requires you to have more documentation for your plan. I know this is Erica, one of your past stormwater interns. I worked with her at CBU, so I thought it'd be okay to include her here. So now they're defining what we actually need to do as far as creating measurable outcomes. So we have conducting public events, providing annual training. These are all things that I think we were striving to do before, but the way the regulations were written, it wasn't holding us to specific measurable items. So the other one, reporting stormwater program updates to elected officials annually. I think we do a wonderful job at that, so I'm not worried about meeting that requirement, but I'm going to go ahead and say that this meets our annual requirement. Illicit discharges, again, this is not one that is changing significantly because this part of Rule 13 did actually a fairly good job of describing what's required of us. The illicit discharge program as it currently stands, we're required to respond to any incidents of illegal dumping, enforcing our local ordinance, which is already in place, conducting dry weather screenings. We know where all of our stormwater outfalls are, do any type of water quality test to monitor for that. We don't have any current requirements for MS4 wide water quality monitoring, but there is, I have a hunch that in the future, as the state rewrites their regulations, that we might be looking at that in the future. So in case you're wondering why we're not doing it currently, it's because it's not required. We maintain our stormwater system map using asset management software, which is already a great start. And so again, IDDE, I'm not as concerned about this one. Next three MCMs, though, I have a few more things to say. So next one is construction, MCM4. There are going to be some growing pains with this one. So Connie will go into more detail, if not today, then next month with you, that the requirements for the new construction general permit are going to have specific requirements that construction sites need to implement some new technologies that we're not going to be used to. And it's going to take some time for our community to get comfortable with them. At the 2020 Contractors Workshop, Connie had a presentation on some of these new updates. So at least some of our local engineers and whoever was at that meeting, they know that this is coming, but we are going to have to do a lot of outreach to make sure that, you know, our contractors have the right materials and equipment to be able to meet these requirements. Some of them are going to be fairly straightforward, hopefully for us at least, as far as our plan reviews and compliance go. So they want to see preservation of topsoil in the SWIPs. That's coming directly from the EPA. It's just a common sense requirement anyway, that if you're stripping topsoil from a site, you need to preserve it on site and then use that for stabilization at the end. A lot of folks will want to strip it and then sell it, and then you don't know where it goes after that. There's no regulation on that. Preservation of natural buffers. There's been a lot of conversation about buffers. I think we are all in support of our natural buffers and preserving those as much as possible. We're just gonna give our own regulations more teeth, I guess, which is always useful. This 7-day stabilization requirement is new. Previously it was 14 days. So if we have trouble with our developers meeting a 14-day stabilization requirement, then we're gonna have a fun time getting them to comply with a 7-day stabilization requirement. Self-monitoring program, again, that's not new, but requires more documentation. Project management log, again, not new, it's a best practice, but it's specifically stated now in these general requirements. So we just have more documentation to track and more things that we're asking of our local contractors. Then we also have some specific requirements for the actual best management practices that you see on construction sites. I'm going to leave a lot of this to Connie, but these are some of the things that I'm concerned about, and we'll get some pushback locally on these. I'm just anticipating stabilization of outfalls and side slopes of any basins used during construction, discharging water from the surface. They're requiring some new technology that Indiana does not currently use to be able to withdraw water from the surface of a pond instead of allowing it to overflow over a weir or something like that. Concrete washout, so we already have the dumpsters and things for the concrete trucks, but now we have to regulate the builders. So any type of cementitious material, we have to regulate any type of I guess runoff or wash water from any stucco, grout, mortar, things like that. That'll be fun. And then all of our dumpsters have to be covered, so they can't have any open dumpsters on a construction site. That is all I'm going to say on construction. We can discuss a lot more about that, and Connie, I trust, will have a lot to say about how that will impact her day-to-day. Does anyone have any questions before I go into the one that I really want to talk with you about? Okay, I see heads shaking. So the post-construction stormwater runoff control, MCM5, these are our permanent stormwater features that you see a lot of the ponds use for flood control. These are the practices that we use to assure the public that we are not going to let new development impact downstream properties from flooding or decreased water quality. So the new ordinance that Terry has been working on will help us meet these requirements. And so that just makes me feel really, really good that we have that in the works. And David and I have been discussing about moving that forward. So previously, the post-construction program was the one that was left behind in the MS4s. Rule 13 did not have a lot to say about it, and the language was so vague that it was really difficult to enforce it. So unless an MS4 has local requirements, that's really what you're held to. So Monroe County, I guess we are fortunate that Terry was able to pass a like a stopgap measure last year to help address some of the basins that are suffering from increased development or have natural resources, significant resources to protect, so that we can make sure that any new development is not going to be significantly impacting the rest of the watershed. The state, with its new program, is going to. It's really robust and it's fairly progressive. And it's requiring not just specific controls on the discharge and volume leaving a new development site, but it's also asking for us to treat that water. So making sure that you're treating, the whatever amount of stormwater that falls on a site and picks up all the pollutants and then leaves, you have to treat that amount of water and make sure that you are minimizing the pollutants leaving a site. So the technical standards manual that comes alongside with the new ordinance that Terry's been working on addresses all of this. And I'm working on reviewing all of it, working with Terry and David to kind of fine tune everything to make sure we have everything in line and ready to comply with these new permit requirements. So this is going to be new for some of our local engineers and developers, but it's not new in the sense that Indiana is a little bit behind a lot of other states. They've never actually required this before. So continuing on post-construction, I have a lot to say on this one. So One of my main concerns for this new general permit is that it's going to require a lot of manpower to actually implement and be in compliance with these provisions. It now has, I guess before it was asking us, you have to create an ordinance and have a mechanism to enforce it. And that was really it. So as you can imagine, if we weren't getting a lot of pushback during our audits, then we weren't really forced into doing this work previously, really just playing defense as needed. We weren't as proactive about it, which is not unique to Monroe County at all. So now we are looking at having a more robust inspection program where any post-construction practice, whether it's a new rain garden used for water quality treatment, or a detention pond installed 10 years ago under the MS4 requirements, those are going to be required to be part of an inventory that is inspected regularly. Inspections, we are going to find items deficient on every single pond we inspect, and I know that just from being out there and seeing the condition of a lot of these ponds. It's going to require a lot of follow-up with the HOAs, property owners, whoever is responsible for maintaining them, to give them recommendations for maintenance. I hope that we don't have to pursue enforcement on every single one, but getting all of these ponds in compliance and getting the homeowners aware of what they're responsible for and how to properly maintain them. It can be as easy as cleaning off the grate on their outlet structure, or mowing down all the woody veg so that, or cleaning out sediment if it's accumulated. It doesn't have to be rebuilding the whole pond all the time, but it's going to be a lot of work now that we're going to be required to inspect all of these ponds each 5-year permit cycle. Any MS4 owned pond, so if there's any detention ponds, rain gardens that we own, we'll be responsible for inspecting those annually. Again, it's just adding to our day-to-day workload. And you can spend a lot of time working with the public to make sure these are all maintained. I will also, one final note on that. So we are currently set up under the route of giving, excuse me? So we currently require HOAs to maintain a lot of these post-construction measures. Another way to do it would be to charge a higher fee, and then we could contract it out. But that's another conversation for another day. So, does anyone have any questions? Okay.
I guess I would just ask the board how we're doing on time. I think these are big conversations and I'd hate to rush it. I do have comments, but I don't want to stall it down, so.
I am almost done with this, and I am going through it quickly and giving you a general overview. I'm hoping we have time for a couple of questions after, and I'm probably going to ask Connie if she can wait till our next meeting so that she has enough time to present her piece, if that's okay. Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
The last part is municipal operations. So everything the county does to reduce or eliminate pollutants from entering our local waterways. We've done a lot of things over recent years under Terry's direction, which help us comply with these requirements, which is great. What we're looking at is just, again, they want to see more documentation. I think Monroe County is doing a really great job, and we are very well suited, with between the crews at the highway garage. We have, street sweepers and everything already in place. Might need some maintenance and might need some extra work, but there are some MS4s who I think they needed some more guidance on how to do this. So what they're looking for municipal operations is more documentation on operation and maintenance of the storm sewer system. They are not necessarily needing every single pipe televised, but more so to have a plan in place for, say, crews are out and they find an issue. We need to make sure we have procedures in place where they know what to look for, they know how to report it, and we have a plan in place to fix any deficient items in the system. I think so far, from what I've seen, we're doing a fine job with that. Quarterly facility inspections, that changed because I'm pretty sure we have to talk to Connie, but that's going to require more work. But time frame for implementation. So we will have 6 months to update our stormwater quality management plan. If you haven't seen that document, I'm happy to share it or provide you with more information, but that is outlining how we're implementing those 6 MCMs, our measurable goals. What is our 5-year plan for implementation, and how many workshops are we going to do? Things like that. We'll have 24 months to update local ordinances. Initially, they were saying you'll have 1 year. So David, I think I told you 1 year, but now they've pushed it to 2 years. It'll give us to update our local ordinances. So I think we are sitting in a good place, having the model ordinance from Christopher Burke almost ready to go, having that technical standards manual drafted. It puts us in a good place, but I wanted to let you all know what is going to be expected of the MS4 program coming down the line. So there are a lot of changes. And again, this hasn't happened since 2003 when these regulations first came about. So this is all very new. And I don't want you to be surprised when next few months things change for us a little bit. So this is my last slide. Does anyone have any questions or comments or want to see anything else next month from me?
I have a quick comment, and one of them is with the ordinance that we're rewriting. I think it was very advantageous that we worked with Christopher Burke Engineering. They are currently working with LTAP to do a statewide model ordinance on technical standards. So we're working with the same group that is basically working with the local LTAP, local technical assistant program, that's going to provide a lot of assistance across the board. So that just, I think, perfect timing there. So I think that was Terry's first initial approach to this, and I thank him for that because it puts us in front of the game. And then as you were discussing kind of where the county is and compared to other states, I know that they just did a presentation on funding and needs assessment, and the county's doing pretty good in a lot of fronts. And I was wondering if when we do more of that recap, if we could kind of compare it to that study as well, to give us kind of a glimpse of where we're at and where everyone else in the state is. And we are actually really moving good as far as we're achieving a lot of things that other counties are not quite yet doing. Those are my only comments.
Thank you, Turn.
Does anyone else have any comments?
I'll send you some questions for just to deal with in March. I think that'd be a better use of time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
May I have a minute?
Yes, please.
I want to take a minute here. This is my last meeting, and I want to thank all of the board for their support over the last 4 years. You've helped me a lot, just being behind me and knowing that you were there. It's been a pleasure working for you guys, and I think, as you can see, Kelsey's going to take things on from here real well. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. We're going to miss you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've truly been an asset to the county. It's been noticeable how things have changed since you came, and been a good thing having you here. And I think Kelsey will do a great job of carrying it forward.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Terry.
I'm gonna miss learning all those new terms, Terry. I mean, you know, you've been my educator through a lot of this, and I really appreciate your calmness and just openness. Yeah. But I also want to ask for the next meeting, I'm going to ask Kelsey that, you know, it sounds like that this is going to put a lot more time demand on your office. And so I'd like to see a little bit more of that mapped out a little bit. You know, is it going to increase by 20 hours a week, 40 hours a week? What's that going to do to us? Because we do have to worry about staffing.
Yes, noted. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
That also helps for the need of an inspector. So I think that only reiterates the direction that the department really needs to go. We did have a meeting real quick. I know you guys are on a time limit. We did have a brief meeting with our liaison on Monday to discuss the fee, which is Jeff McKim. And they seem, from talking with him, that it's a very supported position for the inspector of moving forward with that. So
I don't want to get out of here without thanking Terry as well, but not just only for the service, but I want to give extra thanks for the willingness to serve as we brought on Kelsey to really provide a smooth transition and preserve the continuity of operation. There's a lot of people with these high level positions around the county where we don't have the opportunity to do that, and I think this right here is critical, and I want to thank you for being willing to even take on that additional role as you're moving towards retirement. Thank you, Terry.
It was my pleasure.
All right, is there anything further from anyone? Well, seeing none, once again, thank you so much, Terry, and we wish you best of luck with your future. I hope you'll be doing fun, exciting things. And at this point, I think we can be adjourned.